Altered Carbon episode 2. Right, another good episode. I enjoyed this. The investigation's certainly sort of pushing along with Kovacs. We also learn a bit more about Ortega, the police officer character, a fair bit about that, and we get a bit more of an understanding about the world that we're living in, certainly in terms of the whole sort of sleeve stack thing and clones. That's sort of explained a bit more. Start to get a bit of a better picture of what's going on. Although I still do have a few questions, which hopefully will get answered as the series goes on regarding that. So firstly, Ortega, obviously we've kind of seen she's got some issues, and she's got a bit of some dark stuff that's happened in her past, what we can see. And one of those things, or if it might be the main thing, is losing her father, who I think was also used to be a police officer. She mentioned about how they don't know what happened to him, or they never find out what he last thought, or something along those lines. Certainly sort of referencing, I think, in terms of if he'd gone down the sort of sleeve stack route, they might have found out who, I think, had murdered him, from what we can gather. And this seems to be something that certainly drives her, and certainly seems to be the reason why, as we later learn, she seems to have moved away from her Catholic background, which alarms her mother quite a bit. And that's quite interesting, because we learn about how it seems to be, at least within Catholicism, that you don't come back. If you choose to be Catholic, you don't. That when you die, you die, and that's the way it is. I guess the natural way of things. And if you don't, like Ortega's deciding to leave that, then you can come back, through the form of this stack sleeve thing that's within this series. And also, interestingly, just on that, when Ortega at the end of the episode was doing a confession to, it seemed to be nobody, to be honest, but when she walked out, I think that confession box was in the police station. The only reason I pick up on that is because if you've got one of those in a police station, that would suggest that Catholicism, or maybe a variety of religions, are actually quite prevalent within the police, at least anyway, because if you only had like one or two officers doing that, it'd be strange for that to be there, you would have thought. Going into the whole Kovacs investigation, he's pushing on a little bit more. He's going through a whole load of videos and stuff, obviously seeing a variety of people that have threatened Bancroft, sort of posting, I guess, in essence, like YouTube videos. And there's a lot of them, which probably isn't a massive surprise, because I think Bancroft has probably pissed a lot of people off in his various lives, partly because obviously he's so successful, and you do piss people off to become successful, and also partly because he seems to be a complete knob. So those two things combined will piss a lot of people off, and that certainly seems to have happened. With reviewing these videos, Kovacs discovers one that he thinks is sort of worth looking into a bit further, which brings him to this guy's apartment, Elliot, who looks to be a character that's going to be in this series a bit more, because I think I've seen him in the trailers, so I think he is going to feature a bit more. And he's a former Marine. They have quite a good little sort of fight scene and everything there, and we discover why he was threatening Bancroft. And it was to do with the fact that, I think from what we can see, Bancroft killed Lizzie, or Elizabeth, his daughter, who is now locked in this weird sort of AI world, which seems to be kind of a sort of recurring kind of hell, but seems to be the only way for Elliot to keep her kind of alive as such, before he can get her a new sleeve to go into, which I believe Bancroft should have sorted, or something along those lines. But that pushes Kovacs a bit further, and we get to go to another strip joint, so there's obviously going to be quite a lot of this sort of, it's a dark, seedy world, to be fair, so I moaned a little bit about the whole seedy worldness of this, but I guess, to be honest, when you're investigating a murder in the backdrop of what's going on, then you are going to be drawn to these places. So I sort of retract that moan a little bit from my previous review. But within this, we sort of partly discover actually Kovacs is a pretty good liar. He managed to convince this stripper that he was actually this girl Lizzie's mother, as opposed to being himself, and he did quite a good job of that, and talked about a sort of cross blend or something like that. So I don't know if there can be like two personalities stored in one sleeve or something along those lines. But yeah, from this he learns a bit more, and we discover that, as I was sort of saying earlier, Bancroft is quite a knob, and he seems to be quite into strangling, at least, prostitutes, somewhat to the extent that they die. But the way the prostitutes look at it between themselves is quite often that's a benefit, because you usually get given a better body as a replacement, although that's not really the way to go. But it would appear with Lizzie, something went wrong and then wrong some more, so it looks like she possibly got strangled to death or something, and then things haven't quite gone to plan in terms of getting a replacement body or anything. I'm not quite sure how that works, but that's certainly got Elliot angry and disliking Bancroft, and gives him good motive to kill him. But as Kovacs sort of discovers, or comes to the opinion of, as the episode goes on, in fact he sort of just thinks about it a bit earlier, to be fair, this isn't Elliot isn't really he's a suspect, but he's not the guy that's guilty of doing this. And as the episode went on with that, actually, one of the things I did sort of think, with what we know about Kovacs and his background, it did seem a little bit strange that he was so at ease with investigations and stuff. I'm not saying that's necessarily something that's completely out of his remit, but he seemed to be someone who was quite natural at it. We gauge a little bit about that from a conversation he has with Ortega when he's arrested in the police cell a little bit later after a fight he has, where he talks about how he did also in his past work for the Protectorate, which I don't really know who they are, but I think it seems to imply, unless I've completely missed it, maybe they are just the police and I'm being really dumb here, but it seems to imply that obviously that's where his sort of investigation abilities have sort of come from, which does explain it a bit more, because his character wasn't quite adding up for me up until that point. It was little bit strange that we kind of got this sort of mercenary rebel kind of guy who's very at ease at investigating information and trying to ascertain exactly who's guilty of what, and seems to be pretty good at it as well, to be honest. Now, the other thing we discover or learn in this episode is about the whole clone versus sleeve thing. Certainly, if you're rich, you can use clones of yourself because you buy lots of them, and Bancroft seems to have loads of these, to the extent he uses them to kind of, in essence, teleport from place to place, because he's got them all over the world and he just goes into them as and when he needs to. And I think there's a bit of a reference to a meeting he has where he does that. So that's quite interesting. It also, what they pick up on from that is part of the reason they do this is because if you jump from sort of body to body, so it's not the same body, a clone of your original one, then the more you do that, the more you seem to sort of lose your mind, and it doesn't seem to be basically good for people. So that concept of being able to live forever without using clones doesn't seem to really be plausible, or at least it does, but you'll be completely insane. Whereas using clones means that you can carry on being basically compos mentis. You don't lose the plot, from what they've explained on that. So that's quite interesting. Still, in terms of the sleeves and everything, maybe I've missed it, but I'm yet to quite understand where their origins are. Are these guys grown, or are they born? Are they kind of robots? Because we talk about all these advancements and stuff that Kovac has, but I believe he is a human being. And part of the reason I say that is because there's an interesting little reference about he gets told to stop smoking in this building, and how he says he doesn't really care for them, but the previous body's got a craving for nicotine. So even though he's in that body and he's taken over, certain cravings and addictions or whatever it might be that body enjoyed before enjoys now, which suggests it wasn't kind of a pre-built robot waiting to have something put in it. It was actually a person of some description. One of the other interesting things that happened in this, and certainly this is going to develop, is the AI side of things. Pope, the guy who's in charge of the sort of brothel which Kovac is staying at, went and met some of his friends who were gambling at some sort of poker bar in a kind of VR world. Generally speaking, they have disdain for human beings, whereas Pope seems to have quite a different attitude towards that, and he says how he sort of finds them interesting and likes to sort of study them, whereas the others just basically see them as cattle, and they take advantage and use them for profit and stuff like that, which is interesting, because isn't that, we don't obviously use AI as cattle, but AI is supposed to work for us, not the other way around. And it seems to be that maybe that balance has shifted, or at least in certain sections of society, which is interesting, and I'm sure we'll see how that develops. But in the end, after a few conversations, they're discussing some union that they created. Pope decides to leave, but he does owe them money, which I don't know how relevant that is. It could be gambling debts, it could be more to it. Maybe he's part of the union, who knows? But that was there was little bits and bobs to pick up on there. But I think we're certainly going to see this AI sort of underworld or overworld, however you want to look at it, having more of an impact on the world we're seeing, where we sort of think it's all sort of governed by humans, but actually who really is in charge there? That's quite interesting. And the final thing is these bodies dropping into the water, and there seems to be a little bit about this with this blonde girl and her mother wanting Ortega to release the body or the sleeve or something along those lines, and it looks like Ortega's going to do that by the end of the episode, but not officially. But the interesting thing was that this body fell into the water, like we've sort of seen this scene a little bit. I think we see that happen with Kovac's body possibly in the trailer. And this kid's going to go and sort of scoop it out or whatever, and his dad tells him to leave it alone or you'll get arrested. So this is something that obviously sort of happens a fair bit, and people seem to know about it, or at least the fishermen on the lake. And they just sort of get left there, and then she got picked up and now she's at the police station. But there's obviously more to this. I don't know if she's one of these prostitutes that have been killed and then they just, I don't know, get dropped out of the sky. But there's more to this. Clearly there's more to it because they keep showing us the scene. So in conclusion, another good episode. The story's pushed along quite nicely, as we've already 2 episodes in and know a fair bit about the world we're in and stuff. It hasn't been too slow to sort of give us information, and there's plenty of little bits and bobs there as well to pick up on about the technology and stuff. They don't dwell ages on it. You know, you've got to sort of learn as you go along to an extent. it's certainly a series that you've got to be paying attention to. You can't sort of half watch this, because otherwise you'll miss out on all sorts of probably important bits, which will then mean they won't make any sense later on in the series, I assume. But it seems to be fairly well thought out and fairly well written, which is good. And so I'm looking forward to the next episode. In terms of my overall score for this episode, I will go with a 7 out of 10.